And welcome back, everyone, to the video that I know you have all been waiting for on the 2nd of January. Didn't get it out yesterday like I wanted to, but the end of the year box office report. And I did yesterday's box office report, and I intended to, but the day kind of just got ahead of me. So you're basically getting the best of movies this year, of last year, and the end of the year box office report for 2022 today. What I started doing, look, ultimately, I know not a lot of people actually watch this type of video. A number of you will, and I appreciate every one of you who does. But it just came about because I'm a numbers guy. The box office is a big indication of how healthy the movie-going industry is. And so for us movie fans, the box office, whether we agree with like how people are, spending their money or not, is actually a very important metric for gauging how well and how healthy things are and what the future of movies could be like a little bit. Now, few things. A, I am only going off of the numbers I can find. The box office, that's easy to find. Budgets can be a little harder. In fact, there's a couple movies I had to, not a lot this year, fortunately, but a couple movies I had to omit off certain studio lists because I could not find their budgets. And then there's the marketing budget, which is next to impossible to know unless you're either connected to the industry or, watch a lot of movie talk programs with people connected so I can actually hear what they are. So I have to make a generalized guess of what the marketing budget is on a lot of these things based on how often I saw the trailer, how much media, how expensive the movie was to make, and compare that to what they might be doing to the budget. So I had to do that. So these are not going to be exact numbers. These are probably ballpark figures, more or less. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, coming in as the studio that did the worst this year, Lionsgate. Now, Lionsgate did not have a very large year. In fact, this is one of the movies studios I actually had to omit a film for because I couldn't find the budget on it. But in terms of your main release for Lionsgate, you had Moonfall, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, and Pray for the Devil. None of these did overly well. I mean, you had the only one I actually could find that actually even turned a bit of a profit was Pray for the Devil. And even then, I had to try to remember what the actual budget on this film was. It did not make a large amount of money. When you actually its total box office was like $43 million, and if you factor in between a $7 and $17 million budget with probably $10 million in marketing, now you're looking at a film, and then you take the customary third out. That means this film actually only made about $31 million against either a $17 to $27 million overall budget, which means this film only made maybe $4 million to $11 million or $14 million. Great, wonderful. There's a film that made a little bit of profit. And you know what? Had the rest of the year been fine, great. But Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent lost them roughly $40 million. The movie only made about $29 million. So by the way, I had to round out for a lot of these numbers, so that take that with a grain, take that for what it is. So it only actually made about 20-ish million against a roughly $60 million total budget for 30 in box office and 30 in box office, 30 in production and 30 in marketing probably. Even if I lowball that to 20, and that means it was only actually made on 50 million, it still lost $30 million. But you know what? Small losses like that aren't a big issue. The issue comes when you get to movies like Moonfall, which are made. I couldn't find the exact budget, so whenever there is an estimated between this and this amount for the budget, I just average it out. Made on an averaged out $142 million, probably only admittedly had $50 million in marketing. This film was made on $192 million, made after you take the theater's cut out of the equation, probably roughly $45 million. $147 million loss on this film. And I'm like, well, I guess the question is, why are we giving Roland Emmerich more money right now? Because he hasn't really been able to produce really quality products at the moment. I mean, Independence Day Resurgence, I get it. It was a legacy IP. It's a franchise now. Excuse me. Ugh. It's a franchise now, and it made like $300 and some million. It just was made at such an astronomically large budget that it still lost its money. So I guess look, I like Roland Emmerich films overall. I didn't even hate Independence Day Resurgence. I didn't think it was good, but I had some fun with it. But it's clear that I think it's kind of like the Wachowskis a little bit. Why do people keep giving the Wachowskis such astronomically large budgets when they have not had a very good track record? They just haven't. Roland Emmerich, box office wise, has also not had, ever since like Independence Day or like The Day After Tomorrow, has not had the best track record. I think 2012 was okay, but either way, it just. So these guys, unfortunately, this was not a good year for Lionsgate. Now this year, fortunately, they're going to have a much better year coming up with things like John Wick 4. I actually don't know everything else they have coming out right now, but John Wick Chapter 4 alone is going to be a big win for them, because that is just a beloved franchise right now. So Lionsgate at minus $183 million. Coming in at the number 5 spot, we have Sony, a studio I always pay attention to because they were nearly bankrupt at one point. But now they've been able to come back every year, come back from behind, and they've actually been on pretty high end of the box office side of things in the past couple years. But you'll notice they're only at number 5. Now, why are they only at number 5? Well, I mean, they actually had a couple solid hits. Uncharted, actually, despite the fact that Uncharted wasn't the best reviewed film, I had some fun with it. I didn't hate it. It actually made it around almost $100 million. I mean, it was only actually made on $120 million. You factor probably about $50 in marketing, even if you round it all the way up to $200 million. Even if you did that, which means the film would have had to make $300 million. The film still ultimately did that and would have made $68 million, but it made roughly, I think it's more like $50 million in marketing. So you're looking at a film that made $90 million. Great. Morbius, believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could be so free, but believe it or not, Morbius, despite being one of the most critically panned, and if you watched my worst video, you know it's on my worst list. Critically panned, fan-ed, and kind of financially just, movies, didn't actually lose money. It was made on average, like 104 million. But if I heard, it was made on like on average, like, if I heard correctly, it was made on like 70 some odd million dollars to 80 some odd million dollars. But it actually had like 25 million in marketing. It was very low marketing, surprisingly. Now, this isn't including all the interest that collects for the movie standing on the shelf, mind you. But if we are just going by the box office alone, it made about $8 million. So, okay, what is going wrong here so far? Because then you get into Where the Crawdads Sing. That actually turned a nice little profit, about $50 million, roughly speaking. Then you got Bullet Train, which a little pricey to make. It was around an $87 million budget. Probably had about 50 in marketing, but still made about $290 million after the fact, or excuse me, $159 million after the fact, which means it made about $29 million. So right now it's like, what is the big problem? The big problem ultimately came with the end of the year, because we had Lyle Lyle Crocodile made on a $15 million budget, probably made about 30 in marketing, so $80 million. But only turned about 96 at the box office, which means it only turned out about 64 million overall. So it lost about 16 million. Okay, not a huge loss. They're still doing okay. They're still in the hundreds of millions. I'm going to skip one. I Want to Dance with Somebody at this time has not made its money back. Remember, I am dealing with the year of 2022. Anything a 2022 film makes after that fact doesn't qualify for this. So right now, I Want to Dance with Somebody is in the red. It's not profitable right now, and currently has lost about $45 million. But the one that, when I saw it, I'm like, wait, what? Because if this movie had not come out and done as bad as it did, Sony probably still wouldn't have been in the number 4 spot, but it would have done a lot better. Devotion, no joke, is made on a $90 million budget. Now, you might be asking, what is Devotion? Yeah, not a heavily marketed film. Not very well. I mean, the trailers were fine. I didn't see it, sadly, but the trailers were fine, and I heard it was okay. but okay on a $90 million budget isn't great when you didn't even open to double digits. I take it back. I think it did open to double digits, but it was because it was on Thanksgiving weekend. Devotion, with a $90 million budget, probably didn't have much in marketing, maybe 30. So like 120, all right. Made 21 million worldwide. You take a third out, that's 14 million, because the studio's cut is roughly a third. Roughly. It varies, but the movie theater's cut is roughly a third, roughly. So 14 million, it lost about $106 million. This sounds horrible. This sounds like, oh my God, they also didn't make any money. It actually turns out that when I ultimately broke down the math, roughly, and again, remember, these are all ballpark numbers, made about $12 million in profit, Sony. So Sony managed to eke by with a little bit of cash this year. Barely, but they managed it. So that is number five, Sony. Coming in at number 4, not even in the halfway mark, we have WB. WB is another one that did not have a lot of movies come out this year, but the movies they had come out were mostly positive. The Batman was obviously the big winner for WB this year financially. It made worldwide $771 million. It was averaged out altogether. It's made on about $290 million when you factor marketing, probably. So you're looking at a film, though, that still ended up turning a profit about $224 million, roughly. Those are good numbers. Any studio will take that. Elvis made on a substantial less and made a substantial amount, $286 million. When you factor in the math, roughly, $56 million in profit. Great. Hell, even DC League of Superpets managed to just barely turn a profit at about $7 million. It was a long, arduous climb for that movie, but it managed to do it. And even Don't Worry, Darling, despite the critical panning and audience panning this film got, still ultimately managed to make a little bit of money. Not much, but $7 million. So looking at the numbers, this film the studio could have, in theory, made it into the top 3 spot, the true the true heavy hitters of the year. But unfortunately, they still had one film come out that wasn't the greatest, and that is Black Adam. Now, again, my thoughts of Black Adam are notwithstanding, the film went on to make $391 million. The problem was, when I actually looked into it, the film is made on an average maybe $225 million. And it said that this one probably had about $100 million in marketing. So you factor in, you do the math into the equation, this film lost about $64 million. That's not a small amount. So this ultimately made the studio ultimately land at around $230 million, roughly. And again, if anyone wants to contact this no-name YouTuber named Clockwork Highlander and give them, from the studios, mind you, and give him the true numbers, by all means, just there's a community post. You can just tab a post here. You can just find me there, or you can go to the Facebook page at DJ McKay and Fish. No studio's ever going to contact me. Let me put it this way. The day I get contacted by a major studio to give me the actual rundown of what they actually made, I will let all of you know that. Anyway, coming in at the number 3 spot, very surprising, Disney. Now keep in mind, Disney has the Marvel MCU, they have Avatar, they have Pixar. Disney should, by all accounts, be the number 1 this year, bar none. They've been number 1 for a while. But, let's break it down. You had Death on the Nile. Didn't do too bad, but it was made on too much large of a budget to really save it. So it lost about $28 million. So it $28 million. So it lost a little bit, nothing major. But then you get Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Nearly got to the $1 billion marker. When you factor in it's made on around $200 million. And so am I looking at that right? And about probably close to $150 million, because they marketed the hell out of that film. you're looking at a film that probably turned about $288 million in profit, roughly. Great. Awesome. Then you get the Bob's Burgers movie, which lost about $35 million. Whatever. Then you get Lightyear. And Lightyear was a complete flop. Critically, it was fine. It was well received. Not amazingly received, but well received. The fans liked it enough. But it was made on $200 million. Now, it only had, from what I heard, about like a $75 million marketing. So, that could have been a lot worse. But it lost. It only made $226 million against a $200 million budget on its own, plus 75. So it's 275 total. So if you take the theater's third, roughly, that they get, that means this film only made $151 million against $275 million. Film lost $124 million, roughly. Had it not lost the 220, had it just broken even legitimately, we could be having conversations about them being near like the top spots this year. Now, fortunately, you still had Thor: Love and Thunder, which actually made about $108 million. You had you had Barbarian. Now, Barbarian, believe it or not, it's Disney, but it's like Searchlight. It's one of the sub companies that's owned by Disney, but it is technically Disney. Like Searchlight used to be Fox Searchlight because Fox Studios is merged into Disney. That is Disney still. Anything Searchlight you see is Disney. It's just the part of Disney that lets them do like the R-rated stuff. Barbarian actually made a nice little profit of $15 million, but then you got Amsterdam, which did not do well. Lost about $89 million. Still did better than Babylon's doing, but still. But then you get Black Panther 2, which at this time has made roughly $97 million. Apparently, from what I heard, they had to hit like $700 million just to break even. And the film is made on like $250 million, and that means you factor in that means the marketing had to have been like $200 million on this film. So yeah, but still made $97 million. And right now, Avatar 2 has made, when you actually factor in the insane budget of, if you average it out, 405 based on the numbers they give, and then probably about 150 in marketing, the 1.3, almost 4 billion it's at right now really actually doesn't matter in terms of like, well, okay, it matters, but it's not. It has not made the kind of money you think it'd make with that kind of profit or that kind of box office. It has still made $376 million, which is great. But beyond even Lightyear is the Tragedy of Strange World, which is still kind of in the theaters and still eking a little bit of money here or there, but is ultimately it's ultimately it's probably the biggest bomb Disney had this year. $140 million loss based on what I could like calculate here. It's made on 185 million when it's all said and done, because it's made on based on the averages, 155 million with about a $30 million marketing budget, I'd guess, because it was not marketed at all. That's the only thing that saved it as much as it did, and it only made 67 million. So I mean, you do the math, and that is 140 million roughly that it lost, because that means it only made about 45 million, and it's just, oh god, it sucks. So that put Disney at around 468 million this year. Still not god awful, believe it or not. That's not a bad year, but by Disney standards, that not good. That's not a good year. Okay, let me put it this way: it's not a bad year, but I mean. Between other things, they were hoping for a lot better this year. But I hope this next coming year is looking like it's going to be good for them. So, coming in now at the silver medal spot, number 2. And it's amazing because they up until Avatar had the biggest film of the year. Paramount. Paramount came in at number 2. And they had some bangers. I mean, you had Scream. Believe it or not, Scream made $140 million on a budget of around $24 million, $30 million probably in marketing roughly. So when it's all said and done, the film made about almost $40 million. Jackass Forever turned a nice little profit, roughly speaking, of $24 million. So right now you're getting these small wins, just eking out. And small wins are better than big losses, or even losses in general, or even just breaking even. And even because you are making profit. So then you got Lost City, turned roughly a $21 million profit. Then you get a movie that I didn't even know existed. The Contractor with Chris Pine. Did not know this movie existed. The movie had a budget of $45 million. I don't even know what the marketing on this film was. Because I barely saw it, so I'm going to guess no more than $20 million. And I was highballing that. You want to know what? You want to take a guess, anyone who has not seen this movie or heard of this movie, what this movie made? 10 million, 20 million, 15 million. That'd be bad profit-wise, but makes sense. Just over $2 million. Just over $2 million. And remember, that theater gets a cut. So it only actually made about 1.4, 1.5 million. So basically, if you round the numbers up, the film lost 60 some odd $million. But what are you going to do when you pretty much don't tell anyone that this film is coming out? And I doubt this film would have made the money back anyway, based on what I could tell of it. So then you get like the issues like that. But then you get a movie like Sonic the Hedgehog, which ended up turning a nice profit at about $119 million roughly. Great. And then you get the Big Daddy. Then you get the one that pretty much kind of single-handedly saved theaters this year. Like, I will always defend or always argue that I think Godzilla vs. Kong was the trailblazer because Godzilla vs. Kong made over $400 million. It made like $460 some odd million in theaters alone with a day and date release. And I think that was the movie that told studios, like, no, people want to go back to the movie theaters. We can do this. We can do this still. This can still survive. So I do fully believe Godzilla vs. Kong has to have a lot of praise put to it or has to have a lot of thanks given to it. But it was still a touch and go thing. Movies like Spider-Man No Way Home and now Top Gun Maverick, which brought a lot of the 50 plus theater goers in, brought a lot of them back. It was like they did a survey. They brought a lot of them back. Honestly, I think this has to be in at least the conversation. If there was a Rushmore right now, top 4 movies that saved theaters after the pandemic, I'd go Kong as the George Washington, the first one that did it. I'd go Spider-Man No Way Home. I'd also probably be putting Avatar on here right now, and I'd be putting Top Gun Maverick on there, definitely, and probably Top Gun Maverick would probably be the number 2 just because of what it ultimately did. Like this thing's run was historic, and it ultimately went on to make $1.4 billion, almost 1.5. It was 1.489. So, and this is the part that, first off, Tom Cruise is a fucking genius. But second off, this is the part that killed Paramount from being the number 1 spot. Because there's a very small difference between number 2 and number 1 this year. Tom Cruise, being a producer and really advocating for the theatrical experience, he had a 10% first run take of the box office. 10%. That's $148 million. You know how many of his films he can make with that? None, because he makes expensive. No, that's not true. If he's doing one of his smaller films, he could easily make 10 films with that on 14, or cut that down a little small. Make 5 films at about what? What would that be? I'm doing the math real quick in my head on that. What would that be? Let's see, 10. That'd be like almost $30 million each. Like, and that's not even including his paycheck. So, Tom Cruise is a genius, and let's be very clear. I don't think anyone will argue he's a genius. if Dead Reckoning comes out, part 1, and does something similar to this. Now, maybe it doesn't have to make as much, but if it's able to do like 800, 900, even another billion, yeah. Yeah, I think we'd have to. I think we can't argue that he's a damn genius. But that's still when you take out the theater third, you take the marketing, which by the way, for a movie that made this much, was actually made on a relatively 170 million is a lot, but when you talking about a movie that made this kind of box office, is really not. And probably had about 150 in marketing. Doesn't matter. The film went on to make 573 million roughly overall at the box office. That is over $500,000. Now that could fund about 2 or 3 of his films. So yeah, and then you have Paws of Fury, which lost $38 million. Yeah, Paws of Fury just did not. It made more money than I thought it did at 42 million. But it's made total is on about a $60 million budget, because I do remember seeing the trailer quite a bit. But then you get a movie that comes along that's insane, like Smile, that was made on roughly a $17 million budget, probably only had $20 million in marketing, a decent marketing, but not anything amazing. It went on to make $216 million, turning roughly a $107 million profit. And then you get movies like Babylon, which hasn't even made 20 million. It's only made about 11 million so far. So basically about 8 million roughly. On a $129 million budget roughly. Because again, another film, which I remember seeing the trailer for a lot. So, if Tom Cruise hadn't gotten that 10% first run gross, do you need to go outside, pop up? First run gross. Hold on, I just gotta let my dog outside. And okay, we are moving. There we go. If he hadn't gotten that first one, you need to go outside, it's warm out. It's surprisingly warm out. Okay, I take that back. I just got to blast the cold air. It's not as warm as I thought, but it's warm enough. Go pee-pees and poo-poops. I do not edit. But if Tom Cruise hadn't gotten that first run, yeah, because they ultimately in total, they made roughly $661 million this year. But if Babylon had been so damn expensive and it had just been a better film, would have made more money. And you didn't even go out. You suck. You suck, dog. You don't go to the door. Stupid. Don't go to the door and then not go outside, especially when it's chilly out. You silly dog. But yeah, if Tom Cruise had just not gotten that 10% first run gross, which honestly he earned that, then yeah, they would have had a much easier time. They would have been number one. Or if Babylon had been a better film and just easier to like sit through from my heart. It's a long film apparently and could be cut literally like 50 minutes apparently could be cut out of it. Then yeah, Paramount would have been number one this year. But ultimately, by admission, that leaves us with Universal. Now Universal has a very interesting story here. Because Universal had the most movies come out, and therefore they had the most movies that lost money. But, breaking it down, the 355, which, yeah, not good, lost about $67 million. But then you had a movie called Redeeming Love, which I vaguely remember the title, but that lost about $39 million. Ambulance, the Michael Bay film, lost about $25 million. So right now you're just dealing with loss. Then comes this little film called The Bad Guys, which ultimately turned a nice little profit of about $63 million. It's not made a lot, 74. Probably had about $30 to $40 million. So you're looking about $63 to $53 million it made. Then you got Firestarter, which did not make a lot. Wasn't made a lot, luckily, so only lost about $12 million. So right now you're dealing with films that right now it was not looking good for Universal. Up until the ground shook and prehistory rose again with Jurassic World Dominion, which was the second billion-dollar film of the year this year, which ultimately gave them, roughly speaking, a $341 million boost in profit, which is great. But it's not the most profitable film this year. First off, another film that came along was The Black Phone. That actually turned a nice little profit, about $70 million. You can make a bunch of Black Phone movies on that. But then you got the bombshell. Give up. Come on, drop the bombshell. Minions: The Rise of Gru. I believe at the time of recording this, it stands as the 5th highest grossing film of the year. I'm checking that right now. Let's see, worldwide last year, because it's now 2023. I guess you got to go back. Let's see, worldwide last year. Yeah, the 5th highest grossing film at $939 million last year. And it's only made, and this is the kicker, it's only made on $80 million, and you'd factor probably about $50 million in marketing for that, I'm guessing. So you're talking about a film, even if I went all the way up and matched the production budget, which you sometimes do with the marketing, that means it's made on $160 million. So that means the film would have then instead made $466 million, roughly, but 496 is what I have. Made $496 million. Those are the kind of numbers. It's kind of like The Joker, which was made on less than $100 million and went on to make over $1 billion. That's the kind of stuff you want to see, because that's where the big money can really come. Big money. You can get big money from like big tentpole films like Avatar. And Avatar, like I said, has made almost $400 million right now, and will definitely make more. But that doesn't really matter when you're talking about we're talking about budget and production budget and marketing, and the total of that subtracted from the total amount. If that is in the like the 500s, which it's supposed to be, then it's going to take you forever to really hit those massive amounts of money. Movies like the original Avatar, like Endgame, like Infinity War, like Force Awakens, are anomalies that did in fact make like roughly $1 billion, if I'm not mistaken. But that's because they hit $2 billion. But those are anomalies. There's only 5 films right now that have ever done that. Avatar 2 might be the 6th, but we'll see what happens with that. But so then you go into like Nope, which did turn a little bit of a profit, not much, but $6 million. But then you get some things like Easter Sunday, Beast, Marry Me, all of which didn't lose a lot, but did lose money. Bros, which lost a decent chunk, 32. Halloween Ends turned a little bit of a profit, not a lot. Ticket to Paradise also turned a little bit of a profit. She Said lost about $43 million. The Fabelmans has lost about $52 million at this time, but to be fair, it's more prestige than money. Violent Night, I was so happy to know actually was able to make its money back. By the way, I forgot to add the menu onto the Disney side of things, because I actually did forget the menu on this list. Oh dear, I forgot. Okay, so Disney has lost a little bit more because the menu hasn't broken even yet, but it looks like the menu will break even, so we'll just call it a wash for that. And then you end right in the year right now with Puss in Boots, which is made on $85 million, probably had about 50 in marketing at most, but has only made around $135 million so far. So it has not made its money back right now, Puss in Boots. But it looks like it may very well do that and make money, because Puss in Boots is awesome. I very well might see it a third time, because I showed my girlfriend, who wasn't really interested into it. I described a little bit of the movie to her and my other friend, and they were both like, "Oh, this sounds really good." It's like, this is actually probably one of my favorite movies of the year. I'm like, "Really?" It's like, "Yeah." And I described it to him. I'm like, "Oh yeah, and this and this and this." Like, if I know that, I'd want to see this. Holy crap! Like, well, why don't we all go? I'm down for seeing it a third time. Hell, I'll treat. Come on, we'll make a day of it. It'll be fun. So at some point we're probably going to see it a third time, which I am more than down for. I don't know what it is about. I know there's plenty of things about Puss in Boots I loved, but I don't know what it is that I really just want to continue to just watch that movie again. I don't know. I just thought it was really good. But that ultimately, believe it or not, gave Universal the win at $664 million. Oh, God. Okay. Sorry. Sucked in too much air and it was starting to hiccup. At $664 million. That's $3 million more than Paramount made this year. Really, if just two of the big losses have made a little bit more, or Tom Cruise hadn't gotten his 10% first take, then yeah, Paramount would have been the winners this year. But Universal eked by barely. So, yeah. Anyway, that is the end of the year box office. What did you think of this year? Is there anything surprise you with the studios? Who won? Who lost? How well they did? Let me know in the comments below. But thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.